Well, good morning, and I guess a good late winter morning here across much of the state. But as we were just saying here, we're stuck in a cold pattern, and I think the long and the short of the forecast is there's more to come. There is some signs of some moderation though in the longer term, but some changes in the longer lead outlooks as well that reflect the current weather pattern that we're in. Uh, Looking at the past week here, we something we can talk about for most of the state, not all, but for much of the state, we had a little bit of a taste of early summer over last weekend, with high temperatures reaching the 80-degree mark in many spots for the first time this year. Actually, here locally, it was the first time we had hit 80 since the middle of September of last fall, but it was only a two-day period where we had those warm temperatures. And of course, we have been colder than normal since. And if you take the averages of the last week here on the left side here and put everything together, so we had much above on the weekend and colder than normal before that and after that, you can see we come out to be about normal, which is another example of how sometimes statistics mask out what really happened. It was, though, certainly of note in the northern part of the state. It was colder than normal. You can see several degrees in the case of central and western upper Michigan. This has been a definite trend we've seen here this spring so far. The farther north you go in the state, the farther behind we are in terms of thermal time. And our temperature departures are larger there than they are in the far south. It was also, for many spots, a continued wetter than normal pattern. On the right-hand side here are our weekly precipitation totals. These are actually through yesterday, but you can see most of the state had picked up at least a half to 3/4 of an inch. But on western sections here and some northern parts of the state, we went over 2 inches once again, which is significantly above where we typically are here at this time of the year for late April, and continued our issues with wet soils, wet landscapes. So cool and wet, of course, is a challenging combination for this time of the year. We've had a number of questions about soil temperatures, and I'm throwing this in here. This is a mediagram taken from our EnviroWeather station site here on campus at the MSU Hort facility, and there are two series plotted here. This goes back, these are 5-minute air temperatures, and they're plotted in the red line, and then the green bars are hourly soil temperatures at 2 inches at the, again, site just south of campus here in East Lansing. They go back here to on the far left to last Friday. And it's interesting to look at this if you've wondered, well, how long does it take the soil to respond to these big changes in air temperature? And this gives you a fairly good idea of how that works. And you can see that last Friday was another one of these typical cool spring days. High temperature only got up to about 50 degrees. It got down to the mid 40s at night, and then we had that warm front go through, actually with some rain overnight on Friday into Saturday, and we jumped up to 80 or 81 almost on Saturday, and then again back up to 80 following Sunday, and then we had that long march downward in temperature as the cold air filtered around the weather system and went through the weekend and brought us back down to much below normal. And you can see currently this goes through just about an hour ago. We're running in the upper 20s, which is where most of the state is here. They're at least that, or if not even colder. But the point is, look at the green, and you can see fairly close correlation here and timing with the soil temperatures reaching maxima during the middle to latter part of the afternoon, and minima here around sunrise. That's like what the air temperature does, but you can see that it's damped out a little bit. And it does take a couple days, a day or two, for that 2-inch soil temperature to respond. And as you can see, as temperatures after these two very warm days, when we got up to the mid 60s for our high temperatures, that's the warmest it got. You can see that they've gradually tapered off now, or fallen back down now into the 40s and even some 30s currently. So they do respond fairly quickly. There are other factors here physically, how much water, how much moisture is there. The more moisture that's in the soil, the longer these changes take. That's the general rule. But they do respond relatively quickly. So something that, as we sit here and we wait for a window of opportunity, or hopefully things to start to, and there may be some in some parts of the state here coming up, but the soil temperature is always a critical piece of this, especially if you're looking at germination, seed beds, and when we are planting. So a little bit of look at soil temperatures. Soil moisture here, I threw this in just back to the, I want to under emphasize, it is wet. And if we look at soil moisture in the top 3 feet of the profile expressed in terms of a historical ranking over Michigan, much of the state, it's still 80 percentile, 90 percentile, even higher, especially as you go further north in the state. So it's typically, we have high soil moistures normally in our annual cycle this time of the year, but it's even higher than that because of the above normal precipitation we've had during much of the last several weeks. So that situation also continues. It's not as pronounced as you go east and south in the state, especially down in the southeast corner. That's the area that's had relatively the least precipitation here over the last several weeks, but certainly in the northern part of the state, way too wet. Which brings us up to currently, we have a Canadian origin air mass parked right over the Great Lakes region this morning. And with the exception of the southwest corner, and I apologize for all the lines on this graphic, but we're showing temperatures here as of the last hour. And the air temperatures here are depicted in the colored lines. And what I just wanted to show here, this is pretty unusual for late April in Michigan, but vast majority of the state below freezing now. The freezing line here, if you can't, I know I'm testing your eyesight, but the stick line here, this is 28 degrees. We have freezing temperatures over all but the southwest corner. And it's because we have some clouds down there with a weather system just off to our south and west, and it kept temperatures up a little warmer. But as you go north and east from that corner of the state, you can see temperatures typically in the 20s. We even have some middle and upper teens reported across the north. And that is unusual for this time of the year, for the last week in April. And it really typifies, or it exemplifies the air mass, how unusual that is, the one that's over us. The good news is it's right over the top of us right now, and it's going to be slowly but definitely moving off to the east. And so while we will have another threat for frost overnight tonight, especially northern and eastern sections of the state, we will see some gradual moderation in temperature as the system moves away, and then have a little bit milder conditions. So on our weather map here this morning, here's the big high pressure system with the big blue H's here right over Michigan, but not too far off to our southwest. You can see an area of low pressure out over the central Great Plains with a couple frontal boundaries there. And there's a little bit of moisture riding along that, and that's down here in the lower left. You can see here some of the precipitation. Now, it looks like we actually might have some precip down in the southwest. There's a lot of dry air in place here over the state because of this high pressure cell that we're under. So most of this is just clouds. There may be a sprinkle or two in the far corner of the state, but most of this is not reaching the ground. It shows up on the radar, but again, it's just too dry for it to fall. Now, that changes as you move further west and south out into Illinois and Iowa. They are actually seeing rain there. And the bottom line here, as we look at the evolution of this, is nothing is moving very fast on the weather map. If we move to tomorrow morning, you can see the ridge of high pressure, our Canadian air mass here, moves a few hundred miles off to the east. And then the system off on the Great Plains gets a little bit better organized, and you can see it edges just a little bit closer here. But for most of the state here, we're looking at dry conditions, cool or unusually cool. Same tomorrow, but we'll see a few degrees warmer here tomorrow. I also mentioned there is we'll see probably a threat and a frost and some freezing temperatures, especially across northern parts of the state here once again tonight. But that should probably do it in terms of the frost threat here in the foreseeable future. And then finally, by Saturday, we see the system beginning to get certainly better organized and deeper off to our west. And that begins to spread precipitation from southwest to northeast across the state. Right now, and again, the dry air is still going to be in place there. It's going to take this precip a while to make it here, but I would say by the middle of the day on Saturday, but especially for most places, Saturday evening, overnight into Sunday morning, that's when we'll see a very strong likelihood of rain, especially across the southwestern half of the state. And this one, it looks a little bit more stronger here, more moisture than we've seen in the last couple of days with the guidance. So we're thinking probably a quarter to half inch type precipitation totals here with this particular weather system. Now that moves through and on by late Sunday, and then another weather system moves up from the southwest into the state by Monday and Tuesday. But one of the themes that we're seeing here in the guidance is a continued active storm track like we've had over most of the last several weeks, but displaced a little bit further south than it has been in recent weeks. So what that leads to, and you're going to see this in the medium range here in just a second, but it means that the chances for this continued wetter than normal pattern are greatest in the southern part of the state, less as you go north into upper Michigan, even northern lower Michigan. So we may be looking at a fairly wide variety of precipitation totals here from north to south as we move into next week. But right now, it's looking next week is going to be pretty active again, unfortunately, across southern portions of the state with not daily, but not too far away from it. Another weather system Monday, Tuesday, probably another one late in the work week as well. That's not what we need. Temperatures will be a little bit warmer than they have been, but still at below normal levels. So for the whole week, how much precipitation? You can see again this pattern that I talked about. The highest totals in the southern part of the state, 1/2 to 1 inch, decreasing to less than 1/2 an inch as you go to the far north. A lot of this total here overnight Saturday into Sunday, and then again on Monday and Tuesday. That's so that you're looking primarily here at 2 events. Now in the medium range guidance, more of the same. The jet stream pattern here is projected to be still progressive with a movement of a number of troughs and ridges moving across, just like we've seen over the last several weeks. That's why we have the active storm track. But with that, again, a little bit disheartening news is that the cooler than normal temperature pattern that we've been in likely will continue, at least for the next 1 to 2 weeks. Both the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks are calling for our mean temperatures, as you can see in the upper right here, to remain at below normal levels, and the same again for the 8 to 14 day time frame. Precipitation's a little bit more tricky. With that one, the storm track here a little bit further, displaced a little bit further south, suggests definitely above normal precip in areas to our south, but probably including at least southern portions of the state. So again, maybe a fairly big difference, and that's really, I think, again, exemplifies what we're expecting next week. The southern part of the state will likely see the greatest threat and the highest precipitation totals. Now, finally, looking at the new long lead outlooks, which were issued by the Climate Prediction Center last Thursday, there have been some changes. And we had a consistent run of forecasts. Most of them had suggested that the La Nina event in the equatorial Pacific was going to come to an end. And we would be neutral in the Pacific with very little influence of the Pacific here in our outlook for the summer. Well, guess what happened? La Nina has not given up the ghost yet. It's still there. It's definitely more pronounced than in the forecast had indicated. So it's likely to linger now into the summer months. That has a little bit of an impact. The pattern that we see right now, and we have seen over the last several weeks, I think is fairly typical of La Nina late winter, early spring seasons, with certainly with the above normal precipitation signal that showed up. But there have been, with this and with the most recent medium range forecast guidance, there have been some changes in the direction of our forecast. So for the month of May, on the top here panel, our mean temperatures, upper left, precipitation totals on the upper right. You can see now the outlooks call actually for below normal or cooler than normal mean temperatures during the month of May. That's a definite change. Remember, they had been normal, some cases even a little bit warmer than normal, prior versions of that. So those have been shifted cooler. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the most recent medium range, especially the first part of the month. That's when we're looking at these cooler temperatures. Precipitation had been normal to above normal, and you can see we're sort of still there for May. And then for the 3-month outlook here for May through July, so the first half of the summer, it had been above normal, warmer than normal mean temperatures. Now it has been shifted back to the climatology or equal chances category. So we're sort of stuck with a 1/3 chance of below, near, and above normal. So again, a definite pushback. Precipitation similar to what it was before, normal to above normal totals for the first half. So that is consistent, but the temperature outlooks, long lead, you can see here, have definitely been shifted towards the cooler. So with that, I'll wrap up here. Again, continued cooler than normal, but there is some moderation in temperatures. Frost threat once again here overnight, but not as cold as it is this morning. And the next significant precipitation coming on late on Saturday into Sunday, especially for the southern parts of the state. And then a couple more chances after that for the work week next week, Monday, Tuesday timeframe, and later, especially south. Temperatures warming here. I didn't talk a lot about values, but warming from today. It'll actually be noticeably, we're going to have more sun today in most places than we did yesterday, but we should see the 40s, some low 50s in the south today, and a few degrees warmer than that tomorrow. And then into the weekend, we'll probably, again, in some sections, be in the 50s and 60s for highs, which isn't too far away from where we should be. Low temperatures warming from once again, the upper 20s in the north tonight to the 30s and even some 40s here by the weekend. So at least with temperatures, we'll see a little bit of a moderation by the weekend. And as we just talked about, our medium range and long lead outlooks are still pointing towards the cooler than normal scenario. So patience is going to be a challenge here with, again, waiting, and especially given the moisture is going to be a big part of it. Who gets the moisture and when, as we look, and when can we get out and get some work done? But some parts of the state, I think, especially north, it may dry out enough to allow at least some activity to begin in earnest here as time goes on into next week. And with that, I will stop and move on and introduce our speaker for next week. That's Dr. Aaron Burns, who's going to be talking about post-emergence weed control, and which is ironic, talking about a delayed season, a post-emergence of what, but ultimately it will happen. And Aaron is don't miss that. Aaron's great with talking about weeds and control. It's obviously an issue that we'll have to deal with. It's just a little bit later than we typically deal with it in a given season. And with that, I will stop and hand it back over